Everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to do a breakdown of the 2 p.m. Eastern slate. This is a big 12-game slate, so it's got a lot of interesting options here. With that said, before I get started, guys, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I'm also going to try to do a video for the late slate on DraftKings as well. Not sure I'll do it on FanDuel, but I'll definitely do it for DraftKings, so look forward for that. Also, I do have a couple core plays here in Sean Murphy and Michael Harris for Atlanta on DraftKings, and on FanDuel I have Ozzie Albies, Rafael Devers, and Carlos Correa as my core plays. But let's go ahead and get into the slate itself. For the pitching, we're going to start here and look at Spencer Strider for Atlanta. Now, he has a good upside here. He plays well in the preseason, and he looks to continue the success he had last season. He has high K potential and is facing a very weak lineup, so I think he's in a really good spot to have a great matchup. Brendan Woodruff from Milwaukee, also very interesting today. He has been really good in groups of games last season, and he's one of the better options on the slate with mid 30 fantasy point potential. He also could K upside in this slate. Him and Strider are tied for around 7 strikeouts today on the Vegas odds, and I really do think both of them have good upside. He finished the season last year really well, and I think he's got, even though it's a little bit of a tougher matchup, he's got a good opportunity here to do well. Then I got a couple other options here for you. A good alternative, Lodolo for Cincinnati Reds. Now he's a little bit cheaper, which gives him some upside here, and he has some K potential, though, and he is against a below-average team. I don't think he's going to give up as many home runs as Green does because of how hard Green throws, but I do think Lodolo has some utility on this matchup. The Pirates, they do strike out a lot, and I expect him to do decent. I'm not sure that he is a must-play by any stretch, but he is an interesting play simply because he has some upside in this kind of matchup. And then last but not least, I'm going to mention Zach Wheeler. Now, I don't really think he's a great play, but he's a good alternative to either Strider or Woodruff if you want to go to a different guy. He's got some decent upside here. Not obviously as ideal as some of the others, but he has some good metrics, and he looks decent on the slate in the plus matchup against Texas, who he averaged 21 fantasy points a game against last season, though he does kind of be hit and miss on the wins and losses. So then we're going to get into our catchers here, and we're going to start with Sean Murphy for Atlanta. Now, we'll have to wait and see what Atlanta's lineup looks like, because he will probably start, but it could also be Travis d'Arnaud, and if d'Arnaud was to start, he would also be somewhat interesting. But with Sean Murphy, he has some really good upside here. He's priced low, and he has a great matchup versus a subpar pitcher. I look for him to have a really good game in this one, and so we'll have to wait and see what their starting lineup looks like. But he looks like my top play from the catcher position. Then we're going to look at Tyler Stevenson for Cincinnati, who you could actually put in first or catcher position. And whenever he's at home, he's definitely an interesting, got some interesting upside when he starts and stuff. He's not a huge home run hitter, but he hits the ball pretty well. And when he plays at home, his numbers are obviously inflated at home. And so I think he's definitely viable on the slate in that position. Then we're going to look at Reese McGuire for Boston. He's a good Hail Mary option here. He has got low in potential, but he has got some potential as a decent play on the slate. He is kind of hit or miss, and so that's why he's a Hail Mary play, but he's just very cheap, and that makes him, rosterable. And then we're also going to look at William Contreras for Milwaukee. Now, he has some really good home run potential, and he's a good alternative. He's a little bit cheaper as well, so it's kind of a value play. So he's got a high risk, high reward on this slate, but he should be an interesting play, especially as he gets more comfortable with the Brewers organization. So then we're going to move up to first base here, and we're going to start with Matt Olson, who I really like today, actually, against Washington. He's got some good upside here. He's actually crushed Washington last season for 9.4 fantasy points per game. And while he is a little bit more expensive than I want him to be, he's in a really good spot, and Gray is a guy that definitely he's going to be able to hit well. Ryan Mountcastle, also very interesting for first base. Against Chris Sale, he should have some good upside here. Sale hasn't played a whole lot in the last couple of years, so I look for the Orioles to be a kind of better team than you'd expect today. They have some good utility players, and I wouldn't say that anybody on the team is must play, but Mountcastle is definitely a guy that I tend to like to use. Though he doesn't have the best batting average, but he has home run potential in this game, and so I definitely think he's a good alternative to Matt Olson. And then if you need a little bit of a value play, you can look at Justin Turner at first base for Boston. Obviously, last year he for the Dodgers, his batting average was not ideal. But I do think that, well, I mean, it wasn't bad, but he didn't have this kind of year that people expected him to have. But I look for him to kind of bounce back here, and now that he's in Boston, and he's got a nice plus matchup here. He's a good value play on this one, but he's a little bit higher risk, high reward. But I do like him here. Then we're going to look at Shohei Ohtani as a good option. Now, he's obviously massively expensive, but he has got big upside here, and if you can afford him, then he's definitely somebody to consider because he has home run potential nearly every time out, and he's got a high home run chance in this game. Then we're going to look at Ozzie Albies at second base. Now, I really like Albies today, but he's a little bit higher priced here than I would like him to be. But he's a good solid hitter, and I do think he's got some potential in this game to have a good game. I do want, I wish that he was a little bit cheaper like he is on FanDuel, but he's definitely usable here. Luis Arias from Miami, also kind of interesting today. He's a value play. He's a little bit risky with a tougher matchup against McGill. But McGill didn't really do that well in his first few starts last year, and I look for him to potentially be a good option, kind of as a sneaky play in this matchup. Then we're going to look at Brandon Lowe for Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay's got a good matchup here against Detroit, and Lowe has been extremely good against Detroit last season in 4 games. He's also at home, which is also a little bit of an advantage for him, and I think he's a good alternative to Albies if you want to pay down a little bit. He's a little bit of a utility play here, but he's got some good upside on this matchup. Nick Gordon also a little bit risky Hail Mary play, but he's also pretty inexpensive. The thing about him is that he has some good upside, but he also is a little bit risky, and so because sometimes he gets pulled in the deep part of the game. But if you can feel comfortable with him, then he wouldn't be the worst play on the slate. Rafael Devers at third base is obviously a top play. However, it's a little bit risky today because of his price. It's going to be hard to roster him because of the price, but if you can mix some value in, you can definitely rock him in. And one of him or Ohtani or Acuna probably worth looking at, or maybe even Aaron Judge. Then we're going to look at Austin Riley, who's a little bit less expensive and has just as much upside as Devers does. He's got a good matchup here against Washington, who he crushed last season. I expect him to continue that. He had 8 home runs in 19 games, and I think he'll have some good utility in this game, and he looks like a great option on the slate. And then for a value kind of Hail Mary play, Ramon Urias for Baltimore. Now, he's got home run potential here, and so he has some upside, but he's a little bit risky in the matchup. But again, that's why he's a Hail Mary play, and he's also $3,000, so that helps. Then we're going to look at shortstop, and we're starting with Trey Turner, who obviously pretty expensive, but he is matchup proof, and that despite that being a decently tough matchup, he should be able to pull some fantasy points out of it. I think it's a decent situation for him, but I do think he's somebody that's going to have some upside throughout the season this year, and so take a look at him as a good option, though he's pretty risky because of his price. Jeremy Pena is a good alternative. He's got some good upside here. His price is higher than I'd like it to be, but he's got a good matchup, and it makes him worth a look here. Now, Carlos Correa, I really like him today. I feel like he's got home run potential today. He's a little bit pricey on DraftKings. He's a lot better on FanDuel, which makes him a near must play over there. But he has some good opportunity here to have a home run, and that makes him viable on the slate. Then I got 2 Hail Mary plays in Mateo for Baltimore, who I do think has some good utility and upside here, though he's high risk, high reward in this situation. But he's been good against Boston last season. I expect him to be good against Boston this year as well. And Baltimore looks like kind of a sneaky stack. Then we'll look at Joe Wendell for Miami, who can also play third base and shortstop. He has some utility here. He's a very high risk, very high reward. He can also play third base, obviously, like I said. And if you want to double up in cheap home run punts, he'd be one guy to do it with, along with Mateo. So I think those guys are definitely in play. In the outfield, we're going to start with Michael Harris. Michael Harris is in a really good spot here. He's underpriced, and he's a great option. Yeah, he starts, near the back of Atlanta's lineup most of the time, but he's a core play on this slate, and I think he's great and viable here. Ronald Acuna, also very interesting. He had a great first game, played well, and he looks like he's purely healthy. And if he can get a couple of home runs to get going this season, then he will definitely take off. He's also really good at home, even though he's on the road. But he's been good at Washington too last season, so I expect him to play well in this matchup and raise that batting average that he had last season at Washington up some. But he's got home run potential in this game. Aaron Judge, also very interesting today. I think he's going to hit a whole lot of home runs this season, and you might as well stick him in your lineup when you can afford to. And on a bigger slate like this, he's probably not worth the risk as much because of the size of the slate, but on smaller slates, he's definitely worth taking a risk on. And so if you play in a short slate or even a showdown, you definitely want him in your lineup. And then Anthony Santander for Baltimore. Man, he looks like a really good play today. I think he's going to hit a home run. He's got some really good upside against Boston, who he's crushed before, and Chris Sale hasn't been particularly great as of late. And the matchup here is reasonable. He is a little bit overpriced, but he's definitely worth taking a look at on the slate. Andrew McCutchen, also very interesting for Pittsburgh. Now, he is against Lodolo, who I do like, but if anybody's going to get a home run off of him, I think McCutchen would be the guy. And obviously, it's a hitter's park, so that does give him some utility. Then Austin Meadows. He's kind of a Hail Mary play here for Detroit. He's high risk, high reward. I don't even know if he's high reward, but he's got a tough matchup. But he's got some good upside here in a wonky matchup, and I do think he's got some interesting utility. Despite the fact he didn't play much last season, he has a decent amount of hits the first game, and I expect him to continue to try to get some hits, even if they don't score any runs. He's a guy that's just cheap and kind of a Hail Mary punt. So then we're going to go over to FanDuel, and I've got three core plays here, and Ozzy Albies, Rafael Devers, and Carlos Correa. All three of them are just too cheap for what their potential is on the slate, and you can definitely roster them with whatever pitcher. Even if you go with Spencer Strider, you can basically work in some cheaper options around them. Maybe if you take out Devers, it's a little bit easier, but I think Devers is worth a core play look on the slate. But that said, let's go ahead and get into the pitchers. We're going to start with Spencer Strider. Strider has really good upside today. He's got strikeout potential, and he played well last season near the end, and he played well in spring training. And I think he's going to have a really good opportunity to have a lot of strikeouts in this game. He's one of the best strikeout players on this slate, so I think he's definitely got some good utility. Brandon Woodruff has a lot of strikeout potential as well on this slate, and he looks like he's in a good spot to have a good game. Even though Chicago sometimes is pretty tough, he's a guy that does get a lot of quality starts, and I think he's got some great utility in this matchup. And then Nick Lodolo for Cincinnati. He's high risk, high reward on the slate, a little bit cheaper than those two, and he has some upside here because he got some strikeout potential, and he also has he's facing a team that's not very good, which definitely helps him. And he's had some really big games against Pittsburgh in the past, so I do think he's got some utility, but he is a little bit riskier because of the home game. So then we're going to get into first base and catcher. Now these, we can just put one of these guys. We can also have a utility option on the slate, so do keep that in mind. But I do recommend, trying to mix and match to the positions to, get a good utility spot. But we're going to start with Matt Olson for Atlanta. He looks like he's in a great spot. He's a little bit underpriced here. He had a really good game against Washington so far. He didn't hit a home run. I expect him to have a potential for a home run in this game, and I think he's a great spot. Carlos Santana is a very interesting Hail Mary option on FanDuel because of his price. He is in a tough matchup against Cincinnati's pitcher, but he is in a hitter's ballpark, and he does have the potential to hit home runs, and so I do think he's in a viable spot. Ryan Mountcastle is one of my favorite plays as well. At $3,000, he's definitely somebody that I think is a really good option. Baltimore seems like a kind of sneaky team today, a good team to potentially do a small stack with, and you could definitely use Mountcastle as your starting first baseman like that, and he definitely has some utility here. Pete Alonso, also very interesting today. He's got home run potential in this match against Miami. A little bit risky, but he had a home run in his first game, or in the second game rather, and I think he's got some good utility today as well. And then Justin Turner, he also has some nice upside in this matchup, and he's very underpriced, quite frankly. He's a good value play along with Mountcastle, so I think either one of those guys at first baseman is really good. And you could even mix and match Turner and Mountcastle in the catcher, first base, and third base, or even in the utility spot. So that is definitely something you could do. You could put him, or you could put Mountcastle here, and then you could either take out Devers and put in Turner here as a good option at third, since he has that upside there. Then we're going to look at second base, and obviously Ozzie Albies. He's just underpriced. He's in a great spot. I think he's great on the slate. If he was $4,000, I'd probably roster him just as much. So I think he's got some great utility on the slate, and he's must play. However, if you want a cheap option, Luis Reyes from Miami is interesting. He's got a risky situation from a pitching perspective, but he's got some upside here, and he's had two really good games so far, or pretty good games for his price especially. He's in a good spot. Then Brandon Lowe is a good alternative to Albies. He's a little bit cheaper as well, and he's got some upside here. He's got a good matchup against Spencer Turnbull, and I think he's got some good utility on the slate, despite the fact he's not he's had some really good games against Detroit in the past. That's what I meant to say. So anyway, let's go ahead and get to third base, and we're going to start with Devers, who I do think is a core play today. I'm just showcasing that you can mix and match how you put these guys in your lineup. Devers has some really big time upside here. He had 19 fantasy points in his first game. I look for a similar type of game. He had a couple, he didn't even hit home runs, so I do think he's got some good utility in this matchup. Great matchup for a game where I think it's going to be high scoring, and so I definitely like him quite a bit. I think that the Atlanta game is going to be high scoring. The Boston game is going to be high scoring. Now, you do need to keep track of some weather situations, so just keep that in mind, but those guys look really good today. Then Alex Bregman is a good alternative to him. Bregman has some nice upside. He's a little bit cheaper as well. He's just a good alternative. He hasn't done particularly great so far this season, but he's got some upside regardless. And then Austin Riley, he's another option. All three of these guys are definitely viable on the slate, and they all have good home run potential in their matchups. Then we're going to look at Trey Turner at shortstop. Now, he's not my favorite starter because of his price being higher than Correa, but he does have some great utility here. He is a top-tier play. He's got big-time potential. He didn't even have a home run in his first game. He had a triple, though, and he's got good upside. And I think he's a guy that's going to score a lot of fantasy points this season, which is why his price is already there. Jeremy Pena is kind of a value play and a good alternative to Carlos Correa, who he's been pretty good in his first two games. He's sometimes a little bit inconsistent, but he's in a good spot right now, and I look for him to continue that. And then obviously Carlos Correa, he's just in a great spot. He's underpriced, and he's got a good matchup here. I do think he's in a good spot. I think that he is one of my favorite plays on FanDuel because of his price being so cheap. Then we'll look at the outfield, and we got a couple guys to mention here. Michael Harris being the first one. He's nearly a core play, but his price is a little bit higher than I think it should be on FanDuel. Because once you get up to about 4,000, that's a little similar to 5,000 on DraftKings, and he's pretty expensive here, kind of. But he is kind of borderline a core play because he's just a good hitter, and he's got a great matchup today. Ronald Acuna, also very expensive at $4,100, but he's got a lot of upside in this matchup. And if you think he can hit a home run, then you definitely want to roster him. Aaron Judge, obviously super expensive here for $4,400. He's just going to keep going higher. He's going to hit a lot of home runs this season. On a big slate like this, I'm not that don't feel that necessary to use him, but he is somebody to consider. Josh Chisholm, also for Miami, is a very interesting option here. A little bit risky due to the matchup, but he did hit a home run yesterday. I expect him to have a pretty good season, though he's probably going to have a pretty ups and down batting average. But he does have a value. He is a value play today at his price. Jordan Alvarez has a lot of upside in this matchup against Goelito, and I think he's got some good opportunity here. He's had two really good games to start the season. I expect that to continue. He's going to be a high usage play and a guy that's going to have a lot of fantasy points this season. Anthony Santander is a value play for Baltimore. I just like Baltimore is a is a kind of a sneaky stack today, and Santander is definitely one of the guys you could push in there. Kyle Schwarber for Philadelphia also has some utility here against Evaldi, who's not very good most of the time. I think Evaldi has his moments, but Schwarber is a guy that can hit home runs. And while I didn't have a good game in his first game, I feel like he's going to have a better game today. And then finally, last but not least, Andrew McCutchen. I really do like him today. He's a value play on the slate. He's got a good matchup against Lodolo, but it's a little risky. But his price is cheap enough that you can take a kind of a chance on him as kind of a Hail Mary-ish type play. And he's got some utility here for a home run potential. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. Make sure to check out the later video today when I do that. And have a nice day, guys.